Hi everyone, my name is Paul Mensink. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Biology at Western University in Canada. And today I want to talk to you about some work that my colleagues and I have been doing around an augmented reality app called Marine XR, which is designed to help engage non-science students with science content, and it's built around a case study involving basking sharks. So one of the main problems that I face in my first year courses is that we have interdisciplinary classes. So we have students from science faculty, but we also have students from the arts and humanities or social sciences. And we often get comments like this. I did enjoy the course, although I tend not to go because I am only in the course for my science credit. So all students have to complete a breadth requirement. And when we ask students about their attitudes towards science, so these are responses to, I have a real desire to learn science, we can tell there's a huge gap between students that are in health sciences and science and the other faculties. This engagement gap really limits our ability to have students be scientifically literate or interested in science. So the whole idea about the Marine XR project is trying to use immersive technologies to close that engagement gap and get those students really interested in science. Lorbach et al. In 2014 kind of conceptualized the ARC's model of motivation like this: attention, relevance, and confidence of the material. That kind of encapsulates motivation to learn. And then how satisfied you are determines if you have continued motivation to learn. So we set this research project up as an introductory lesson in AR or in a control, more traditional style of web-based learning, and then follow up with a more traditional lecture and seeing if A, the two groups, the AR and the control group, differed in terms of how well students were engaged, and then B, whether or not that engagement kind of spilled over into the more traditional lecture as well. So here's a little video of the AR app that we developed. We did this with a local creative company here called XR Studios. They did a fantastic job putting together an experience where you can walk around the basking shark. This is our second largest fish. These fish are the size of a bus. So you can walk down it. You can click on different aspects of its anatomy. You can get swallowed by the shark and learn about their prey items like zooplankton seen here, or about the phytoplankton that feed those zooplankton, along with microplastics that get incidentally ingested. Here we're in the deep sea and the deep scattering layer learning about carbon sequestration, and students even get a chance to role play and be marine scientists attaching satellite tags to the shark fins. Now, we did trial this in the classroom. So here are students actually using the app itself. You can see this student is applying the satellite tag to the dorsal fin. But for the research project, we wanted to know if this could be something that could be used in a remote scenario. So we did it in a fully online class. And this is how the breakdown went. So you can see at the top our Envirosci 1021 class has 250 students. Students arrived in the Zoom session. We recruited them. They went through the letter of consent. And then they completed survey 1, which was looking at their attitudes towards science. And that was that first figure that I showed, the gap between those different faculties. Consenting students were then randomized either to one breakout room or the other. In breakout room 1, they went through an introductory activity with an intro into augmented reality that was the Marine XR app. In breakout room 2, we had all the similar learning objectives in the content, but it was actually in a web-based portal in our learning management system. After they completed those activities in their breakout rooms, students then completed surveys looking at their cognitive load, their motivation, engagement, and immersion in the content. And so the first question we wanted to do is compare that AR group with the control group and see if the augmented reality boosted students' engagement. Secondly, everybody returned to the main room and went through a more traditional Zoom lecture. There we wanted to know, did your engagement or motivation from the initial introductory activity help motivate you to be part of the Zoom lecture or listen to the Zoom lecture? So that was kind of the second part of our question. Afterwards, we asked them a question again about their motivation, engagement, relevance, and competence based just on the Zoom lecture itself to see if there were any kind of lingering effects from the AR experience. These were our controls that we had: the augmented reality app for students in Breakout Room 1. And on the right, you see some examples of the web-based in our learning management system control. So there were images and some videos and some text associated with that, something that we would more likely see in a learning management system. This figure here shows the impact of AR relative to the control group. So we're actually seeing that there were major differences across satisfaction, engagement, and engrossment for students that were in the AR group. So they were having higher satisfaction, higher engagement, and higher engrossment in the introductory lesson. So that's great to see that was impactful and successful. Well, what did the students actually say? Well, I really liked this lesson. It's good for auditory visual learners, kinesthetic learning. Other students said that they retained more information, they thought, from going through the AR. So that's spectacular. We're seeing that AR is actually engaging students, and students are finding that helpful. Well, what about relative to their attitudes towards science? And that's where we found something a little bit interesting. So here on the left-hand side, you're seeing students, the higher the scores, the less engaged the students are. So the lower the scores, they're more engaged. And on the bottom here to the left, they really enjoy science, and to the right, they said that they don't enjoy science very much. So what we were hoping for is that those students on the right side of this figure, those who don't really enjoy science, their scores were going to come down and they would be more engaged with the content. But what we actually saw was a bit of the opposite. Is students that really enjoyed science enjoyed the experience even more than they normally would. So we actually, although we increased engagement really well, we actually did this mostly for science students themselves. So we didn't kind of cover off that gap that I was talking about at the beginning. What's a little bit worse is that we've got here is showing cognitive load. So high cognitive load is lower down, low cognitive load's higher up. And then at the bottom here, enjoys science over to the left and does not enjoy science over to the right. So students that don't really enjoy science actually had a higher cognitive load in AR. So not only did we not necessarily engage them in that content to kind of close that gap, but they found that there was a higher cognitive load associated with that. So really interesting findings in terms of looking at differences across students in terms of their attitudes towards science and its impacts on going through AR. But what about that final step, going through that traditional Zoom lecture? Well, let's take a look at the findings there. And in fact, we didn't really see any spillover. So attention, relevance, maybe a little bit in confidence. And students said that after they went through the AR experience, they were a bit more likely to do well on a subsequent test. So that's really interesting. But otherwise, attention, satisfaction with the Zoom lecture, no difference between the control groups. So we're actually seeing that the AR is not necessarily spilling over to the next step. We even outright asked students, after completing the introductory lesson, I was motivated to complete this activity. No impact of the intervention that way. So that didn't bleed over into the next activity that they did. Really looking forward to discussing this more at our session. A really huge thank you to XR Studios and Unity, who was really helpful in developing this, and support was provided by the Unity Charitable Fund, Fund of the Tides Foundation. Thanks again, and looking forward to talking to you all.